Touchstone. My sister Sandra was always a touchstone for me, a rock-solid base by which I could measure the goings on in my life, no matter how crazy things would get. By 2000, Britney's career had already exploded into something much bigger and crazier than any of us could ever have imagined. But at that point, we were still just experiencing the exciting aspects of her success. The drawbacks, unending media scrutiny, stalkers, and the plague of paparazzi had yet to really touch us. It was like a bulletproof thrill right then. In the midst of that year, though the dreamlike adventure would be punctured by one devastating piece of news. Sandra had been experiencing gastrointestinal problems, or so she thought. An ultrasound detected a growth on her ovary that turned out to be malignant. I couldn't believe it. Sandra, my teacher, my defender, my best friend. How could she be vulnerable to anything, much less a life-threatening disease? We were both middle-aged women by that point. She was 52 and I was 44. Yet in my mind, she was still that fearless 12-year-old, watching out for water moccasins down at their creek with the riding piggyback. Sandra was a strong one, always, no matter what I was going through with my children or my marriage, anything at all in my life. Sandra would be the person I would turn to for calm, reassurance, and the exact right piece of advice. Not that she was one to spot off unwanted advice. Far from it, Sandra always took a good, long time formulating her response to anything. That's how she kept herself so gentle, so beyond reproach. What I mean by that is that Sandra just didn't have the same complications in her life as those of us do, most of us, who don't think before we speak. Sandra never failed to give some thought to a matter before she spoke or acted. As a result, there was a real purity about her conduct and her life that I admired so much. Her diagnosis shook me to the core, as I was the little sister who always looked to the elder daughter for comfort and sanity in the midst of trouble and pain. Now it was my turn to be tough for Sandra, to try to provide some of the emotional shelter and strength she had always given me. A snippet from my journal reveals what I was going through at that time. How can this be? There's too much suffering. How can I keep from going insane? I railed at God, who gave me such a beautiful, lovely sister and seemed to be about to take her away. How can you allow a wonderful, nurturing, angelic person to endure such a heartache and remain whole? I could only hope that one day I would understand more of his plan, but at the time nothing, especially the providential hand of God, made much sense. Anyone who has experienced the slow decline of a beloved person in her life probably understands what I mean. Nothing rattles your faith like a grim diagnosis for someone you love. Sandra endured chemo and all the horrible side effects for 1 year, and then, blessedly, her cancer went into remission. I immediately went into denial, thinking for sure now everything would be as it was, with Sandra the picture of health and she and I marching through our lives as the indestructible Bridget sisters once more. Or maybe it wasn't denial so much as trying with all my might to hold a positive attitude. Likely it was a complicated mixture of both. We ended up having 1 year in which I could successfully pretend the cancer would never come back, but it was only a year. Then one day her abdominal pains struck again, until finally she could hardly walk. She was in so much agony. Sandra had come to visit Britney, and we were all on Melrose Avenue on one of our legendary shopping trips when she doubled over with pain. Ovarian cancer, stealthy, murderous thing that it is, was back, and it never left us again. If you lost if you've lost a loved one to cancer, you know exactly what I mean when I describe those years as a roller coaster I never wanted to get on. For 6 years it was a non-stop fight. Her CA-125 blood levels would go up and down. The test wouldn't show much cancer 1 month, and then the next month her levels would rise again. How I prayed that everything would be okay. We talked every day at least once, but when I knew she was going into the doctors for another test, I'd be afraid of her calls. Literally, I'd be so afraid that when the phone rang, I would freeze, paralyzed with fear of what she would say. Was it good news or horrible news? I ached inside, but I tried to project a positive, cheerful outlook, full of plans for the future that surely Sandra and I would share. Surely we would, because the alternative was unthinkable.